In wartime Paris, a polite little man with a neat red-brown beard answers a newspaper's Lonely Hearts column and promises a grieving widow a brand new life. He has placed his own advertisement too, a comfortable widower seeking a kind lady, and the replies arrive by the hundred. But Henri Lacroix does not want a wife. He wants what each woman owns: her savings, her securities, and her gold. One by one, he leads them to a quiet villa outside the city, and one by one they walk in and are never seen again, while a large iron stove does the rest. No detective catches him. The foul black smoke from his chimney does, and a little notebook will reveal 11 lives, ticked off like a shopkeeper's accounts. This is the story of the man the newspapers will come to call the French Bluebeard. He is no monster to look at, only a balding, bearded little businessman with soft hands and charming manners. For years he has lived as a small-time swindler, cheating trusting widows out of their modest pensions. Then the Great War fills France with lonely widows, and his swindle quietly turns to murder. Across 4 years, he courts dozens of women, choosing those with money and no one close enough to miss them. He woos them by letter, proposes marriage, and persuades them to sell everything they own. Then he takes them to a rented country villa, and there, one after another, each woman simply vanishes. He empties their bank accounts, forges their signatures, and sells off their furniture for cash. To their families, he sends cheerful postcards, explaining that his new bride is unwell and cannot write. With the men of France away at the front, the police are too few to chase after missing widows. And so, for years, no one comes looking, and the disappearances pile up entirely unnoticed. He keeps a meticulous notebook, recording each woman's name, her fortune, and even his own small expenses. He records his murders the way a clerk records sales, noting coldly the cost of a single ticket home. The killing is done quietly, behind locked doors, and the great iron stove erases whatever is left behind. Neighbors notice only the strange, foul-smelling smoke that sometimes pours from his kitchen chimney. His undoing is not a clever detective, but the stubborn sister of one of his vanished victims. She refuses to believe her sister has simply run away, and she will not stop asking questions. She writes to the village, she searches the streets of Paris, and at last she spots him by pure chance. In the spring of 1919, the police finally arrest the charming little widower. They dig up the villa gardens and drag the panes, but they find no human bodies at all. Certain that without a body there can be no conviction, he stays perfectly calm and says nothing. Then they open his stove, and inside they find fragments of bone, teeth, and the small fittings of women's clothes. At his trial, he is charming and arrogant, mocking the prosecutors and denying every single charge. But 2 women who escaped his villa alive walk into the court to testify against him. He is found guilty of 11 murders and sentenced to die beneath the guillotine. To the very end, he insists that he is innocent and goes to his death without ever confessing. Yet hidden behind a drawing he leaves his lawyers is the confession he never once spoke aloud. Henri Désiré Lacroix is born in Paris in 1869, the clever son of respectable, hard-working parents. As a boy, he is bright, devout, and good with figures, a model pupil who seems destined for success. He studies mechanical engineering and serves several years in the army, rising to the rank of sergeant. While still young, he seduces his own cousin, who bears him a daughter, and he later marries her. He goes on to father 4 children, and to all appearances, he is an ordinary family man. To support them, he sets up as a garage owner and a dealer in second-hand furniture in Paris. But the furniture trade brings lonely widows to his door, and he sees an opportunity in their grief. He persuades these women to invest their small pensions in business schemes he has simply invented. The schemes are frauds, and the money quietly disappears into his own pockets. Again and again he is caught, and between 1900 and 1914 he is convicted on 7 separate charges of fraud. The disgrace proves too much for his father, who takes his own life in shame. Henri feels no such shame, only irritation that honest swindling keeps landing him in prison. He comes to believe the law will always catch a thief because a thief leaves a living victim behind. A victim who can complain, who can testify, and who can point a finger across a courtroom. And so a colder, simpler idea slowly begins to take shape in his mind. If the victim were gone completely, there would be no one left alive to accuse him. In the summer of 1914, the Great War erupts, and the men of France march away to the trenches. They leave behind a nation of widows, many of them lonely, frightened, and holding small inheritances. Henri Lacroix studies the war widows of France and sees not sorrow, but easy money. He turns to the matrimonial columns of the Paris newspapers, where the lonely advertise for love. He composes his own notice, a comfortable widower of 43, affectionate and well-to-do, seeking a lady to marry. He does not mention that he already has a wife and 4 children waiting quietly at home. The replies pour in by the hundred, and he files them away like a businessman sorting his orders. Beside the letters from women without money, he writes 2 cold little words, without resources. The rest he studies carefully, choosing widows who are comfortable, trusting, and alone in the world. He is squat, balding, and bearded, yet his letters and his soft voice make him strangely persuasive. His first victim is Jeanne Brossard, a widow who owns a small hat shop and has a 16-year-old son. To her, he gives a false name, the first of the many disguises he will wear over the years. Her sister distrusts him at once and begs Jeanne not to give up everything for this stranger. But Jeanne is in love, and in the winter of 1914, she helps him furnish a villa at Vernouillet. For a short while, the widow, her son, and her suitor live there together just like a family. Then, in January 1915, Jeanne Brossard and her son, André Georges, are seen alive for the last time. The boy, only 16 years old, vanishes with his mother, and no trace of either is ever found. Henri pockets her savings in a gold watch, which he coolly presents to his own real wife. Months later, he advertises again, and a widow named Thérèse Vasseur answers his tender call. She sells her furniture, tells her friends she is to be married, and moves out to the villa. 5 days later, she too has disappeared, and her belongings are quietly sold off for money. A third woman, Marie-Angélique Fontaine, follows her out to Vernouillet that very same summer. Within days she is gone, and using forged papers, he empties 12,000 francs from her account. 3 lives have already ended, and still not a single policeman has come to his door. By the end of 1915, Henri Lacroix needs somewhere far more private for his terrible work. He rents a secluded villa at Gambais, set on the edge of a great forest near Paris. The house is isolated with no close neighbors to hear or to see what happens inside. In its kitchen, he installs a large iron stove, far bigger than any cooking could ever require. To the next widow, a Madame Mercier, he is simply a kind gentleman who calls himself Dupont. She arrives at the lonely villa in December 1916, and she is never once seen leaving it. He records the journey in his notebook, noting 2 train tickets out and only 1 ticket back. Anna Charpentier, a clerk who gives up her job to marry him, follows her out to Gambais. She too vanishes into the silence of the villa, and her savings flow straight into his accounts. Not all of his victims are wealthy widows. One is a penniless servant girl of just 19. He meets André Anne Lemoine in the Paris underground and offers her a place to stay. She tells her mother she is engaged to be married, and then she is gone like all the others. Perhaps she had simply grown too curious about the man in the secrets of his country house. For more than a year, he courts a wealthy widow named Celestine Grenier entirely by letter. She buys a wedding dress for a marriage that will never once take place. Another, Louise Perrault, writes to her aunt of the strange dread that her suitor stirs in her. She says there is something in his terrible gaze, as though she were looking at the devil himself. Days later, her bank account is emptied, and Louise is never heard from again. To keep the families calm, he sends postcards in the missing women's names, claiming all is well. He explains in each one that his bride has fallen ill and cannot write for a little while. Always he buys 2 months of silence, the time it would take to sail away to another country. The last to arrive is Maria Therese Levine, who comes to the villa with her 3 little dogs. The woman disappears, and only the dogs found strangled in the garden are ever recovered. Behind him now lie 10 women and a boy, and still the foul smoke is his only confession. By 1910, the war is over, but more than a dozen women have melted away without a sound. The reason no one has stopped him is as ordinary as it is deeply shameful. With France at war, the police forces are stripping and their fittest men sent off to the front. The few officers left behind have neither the time nor the men to chase vanished widows. And Henri has chosen his victims well, picking women who had drifted apart from their families. But he has finally made a fatal mistake with the determined sister of Celestine Grenier. The sister refuses to believe that Celestine has run off without a single word to her. She remembers that Celestine left to marry a man whose borrowed name she had been told. She writes to the mayor of the village near the villa, asking after the missing couple. The mayor replies that he knows no such people, only a quiet tenant going by another name. Still, she will not let it rest, and she takes her growing fears to the Paris police. Officers visit the villa at last, but they find it empty, its mysterious tenant long gone. Then by sheer chance, the sister sees him on a Paris street, stepping out of a shop. She recognizes the charming suitor who had courted Celestine under a false name. She follows him, learns the address where he lives with yet another woman, and runs to the police. In April 1919, officers arrest the bearded little man on a Paris street at last. They search his villa and dig deep in its gardens, expecting to uncover a row of graves. They drag the ponds and turn over the flower beds, but not one human body is ever found. All they recover are the small bones of 3 strangled dogs buried out in the yard. Henri Lacroix watches their failure and grows calm, utterly certain that he is safe. He believes that without a single corpse, no court in France can ever convict him of murder. So he folds his arms, says almost nothing, and simply waits for them to give up. The detectives do find his notebook with its long lists of names and sums and journeys. But the cramped, coded little entries read like riddles and prove almost nothing on their own. For a time, it truly seems that the French Bluebeard may simply walk free. Then the people of Gambay begin to talk among themselves about the smoke. They remember the foul black clouds that had so often poured from the villa's kitchen chimney. The investigators turn at last to the great iron stove standing inside the house. When they take it carefully apart, they find it choked with the residue of his crimes. Among the cold ashes lie hundreds of small fragments of human bone and teeth. There are hairpins, dress hooks, and little buttons of mother-of-pearl and metal. These are the only remains of the women who walked into the villa and never walked out. At last, in November 1921, Henri Lacroix is brought to trial in the city of Paris. He stands accused of murdering 10 women and 1 young boy, 11 lives in all. To every charge he pleads not guilty, and in the dock he is calm and openly mocking. He answers the prosecutors with sharp, witty remarks, treating the whole trial like a performance. The court learns that he had written to nearly 300 women in his patient search for victims. Then come the two witnesses whose testimony turns the entire trial against him. Both are women who had visited his villa as brides-to-be and somehow left it alive. One is too ill to attend and can only send a written account of her narrow escape. The other is Fernande Lenoir, a young singer who had lived with him right up to his arrest. She tells the court how he had charmed her, courted her, and promised to make her his wife. She had cooked in the villa's kitchen, never once knowing what its great stove had done. The chief prosecutor calls him a cruel and callous man and demands the supreme penalty of death. His lawyer argues that with no bodies, there is no real proof that anyone has truly died. Perhaps, he suggests, the women had merely sailed away abroad to begin quiet new lives. But the bone fragments from the stove answer for the dead more loudly than any living witness. On the 29th of November, the jury finds Henri Lacroix guilty of all 11 murders. He is condemned to die beneath the falling blade of the guillotine. His appeal is refused, and on a cold February morning in 1922, the sentence is carried out. To the very last, he swears aloud that he has never killed a single soul. Before his execution, he hands his lawyers a small drawing he had made in his prison cell. Hidden behind it, undiscovered for nearly 50 years, is his full and written confession. In the end, the Lonely Hearts Killer keeps his secret almost as long as he kept his silence. If you have followed this channel, you have seen how charm and respectability can hide unspeakable things. You have watched a quiet London clerk kill lonely young men simply so that he would not be alone. Next time, we cross the Atlantic to the highways of Florida and to America's most infamous female killer. A drifting woman who climbed into the cars of strangers and left a trail of dead men along the road.